Maggie had always believed that everything happens for a reason. But after the unexpected death of her husband, she found that phrase to be more infuriating than comforting. As she struggled to navigate her grief, Maggie couldn't escape the well-meaning but misguided advice of her friends and family. They urged her to move on and find closure, but how could she when her heart felt like it had been shattered into a million pieces? It wasn't until a chance encounter with a stranger that Maggie's perspective began to shift. The woman, who had also experienced a devastating loss, shared with Maggie the concept of redefining grief support. She told Maggie about a book, It's Okay That You're Not Okay, by Megan Devine, which had completely transformed her own grief journey. Intrigued, Maggie picked up a copy of the book and was immediately captivated by its message. Megan's words spoke directly to her soul, and she finally felt like someone understood the pain she was going through. As she read on, she discovered the ways society had misunderstood grief and the importance of acknowledging and supporting one another through the painful experience. Maggie realized that she didn't have to go through her grief alone, and that it was okay to feel the pain of her loss. It wasn't something to be corrected or overcome, but an experience to live with. Through the guidance of It's Okay That You're Not Okay, Maggie found the strength to begin her own journey towards healing and living meaningfully with grief. If you're tired of feeling like no one understands the pain of your loss and are ready to redefine the way we perceive and support grief, then It's Okay That You're Not Okay is the book for you. Let Megan Devine's words be the guiding light on your own grief journey, and remember, everything happens for a reason. You'll be okay again. Chapter 1. As Sarah walked down the street, she felt a sense of numbness creeping over her. Her best friend had just passed away, and she was struggling to come to terms with the loss. The last thing she needed was someone telling her that everything happens for a reason, or that time would heal her pain. She had heard it all before, and it only made her feel more alone. As she approached her apartment building, she saw a flyer for a grief support group in the lobby. It advertised a new approach to grief support, one that didn't rely on platitudes or well-intentioned but ultimately unhelpful advice. Sarah was intrigued. She had always felt like her grief was something to be hidden away, something to be overcome. But what if there was a way to integrate her pain into her life, to live with it instead of trying to move on from it? She attended the first meeting of the support group, and was struck by how different it was from other grief support groups she had attended in the past. Instead of trying to fix her, the facilitator acknowledged the depth of her pain and encouraged her to share her story with the group. As she listened to the other members of the group talk about their own experiences of loss, Sarah began to feel a sense of connection and understanding that she had never felt before. She realized that her grief was not something to be ashamed of, or something to be fixed, but something to be honored and carried together. In the coming weeks, she attended every meeting of the support group, and slowly but surely, she began to feel like she could carry her grief with her, instead of trying to leave it behind. And when she saw others struggling with their own losses, she was able to offer them the same kind of support and understanding that she had found in the group. For Sarah, everything had indeed happened for a reason. She had lost her friend, but in the process, she had found a new way of approaching grief, one that allowed her to live a fuller and more meaningful life, even in the face of loss. Chapter 2. Emma had always been a happy-go-lucky person. Her bubbly personality and infectious smile could light up any room she walked into. But that all changed when she lost her husband, James, in a car accident. Suddenly, her world was turned upside down, and she found herself drowning in a sea of grief. Emma tried to keep up appearances, attending James's funeral and memorial service, but she couldn't bear to talk to anyone. All she wanted was to be alone. Her friends and family tried to console her, offering their well-meaning but ultimately ineffective platitudes. It only made things worse. Days turned into weeks, and Emma found herself unable to leave her house. The mere thought of going outside filled her with anxiety and panic. She couldn't sleep, couldn't eat, and couldn't stop crying. She was suffering, and she didn't know how to stop. That's when she remembered the words of the Buddha. Pain is inevitable, but suffering is optional. Emma realized that she didn't have to suffer through this alone. She could take things at her own pace, without worrying about what anyone else thought. She started by allowing herself to grieve in her own way. She didn't have to clean out James's belongings or take off her wedding ring. She could do it when she was ready, on her own terms. She also realized that she didn't have to put up with other people's insensitive behavior. When her in-laws tried to take over the funeral arrangements, Emma put her foot down. She didn't have to deal with their meddling. When her friends stopped calling her, she didn't take it personally. She knew they didn't know how to help her. Emma learned that the key to self-care during grief is to take things one step at a time. She didn't have to do everything all at once. If she didn't feel like leaving the house, she could have her groceries delivered. If she didn't feel like attending a memorial service, she could decline the invitation. Through it all, Emma came to understand that grief is a unique experience. No two people grieve the same way, and that's okay. She found comfort in knowing that she could grieve in her own way and on her own terms. And with time, she knew she would be able to find a way forward. Chapter 3. Lila had always been a strong and resilient person. She had weathered many storms in her life, but nothing could have prepared her for the loss of her mother. Lila's grief was all-encompassing, consuming her every thought and emotion. She felt like she was drowning in a sea of pain, unable to escape. As the days turned into weeks and weeks turned into months, Lila found herself struggling to cope with the intense stress that came with grief. She had never realized just how much it could affect her mind and body. At first, Lila tried to ignore the physical symptoms of grief. She brushed off the headaches and heartburn, convincing herself that they were just a part of the mourning process. But as time went on, the symptoms only got worse. Lila found herself struggling to get out of bed in the morning, her energy levels at an all-time low. It wasn't until Lila started keeping a journal that she began to realize just how much grief was impacting her life. She started to notice patterns in her mood and energy levels, realizing that certain activities and people drained her of her energy, while others brought her peace and comfort. As Lila continued to explore the effects of grief on her mind and body, she began to find ways to ease her suffering. She turned to writing and painting as a way to channel her pain, finding solace in the act of creation. She confided in her closest friends, sharing her darkest thoughts and fears. She took small steps to care for her body, going for short walks and nourishing herself with healthy food. Slowly but surely, Lila started to feel a glimmer of hope. She still grieved for her mother every day, but the intense stress and physical symptoms were no longer overwhelming her. She had found a way to tend to her pain without unnecessary suffering, and she knew that she would continue to do so as long as she needed to. Grief was a powerful force, but Lila had learned that she was even stronger. She was a survivor, and she knew that she would make it through this dark time with grace and courage. Chapter 4. Lila sat in her living room, staring at the empty space where her husband's favorite armchair used to be. It had been 2 years since he died, but the pain still felt as fresh as the day it happened. She had tried to move on, to find ways to fill the void he left behind, but nothing seemed to work. As she sat there, lost in thought, a knock on the door interrupted her. It was her best friend, Sarah, with a bottle of wine and a sympathetic smile. Lila welcomed her inside, grateful for the company. Over the course of the evening, they talked about everything and nothing, but the conversation inevitably turned to Lila's grief. Sarah listened patiently as Lila poured out her heart, sharing her fears and frustrations about how hard it was to move forward. "It's been 2 years, Lila said, taking a sip of wine. "Everyone keeps telling me that I should be feeling better by now, but I'm not. It's like the pain is just getting worse." Sarah nodded, understanding. "I know it doesn't feel like it right now, but grief doesn't have a timeline. There's no right or wrong way to feel, and there's no set amount of time it takes to heal." Lila sighed, feeling a glimmer of hope. "But what can I do? How do I find a way to live with this pain?" Sarah smiled, taking Lila's hand. "You don't have to do it alone. It's okay to ask for help, to lean on the people who love you. And it's okay to create new ways to remember and honor your husband." Lila thought about what Sarah said, feeling a sense of relief wash over her. maybe there was a way to move forward, to find a new normal in the midst of her grief. Over the coming weeks and months, Lila began to take Sarah's advice to heart. She talked openly and honestly about her grief, even when it was hard. She created new rituals to honor her husband's memory, like lighting a candle every night before bed. And she started to build a support system of people who understood what she was going through. It wasn't easy, but as Lila started to integrate her grief into her life, she began to see a way forward. She still missed her husband every day, but the pain was no longer all-consuming. And as she looked to the future, she realized that her image of recovery was less about getting better, and more about finding a way to carry her grief with grace. Because, as she now understood, grief was here to stay. And the only way to move forward was to do it with honesty, love, and the support of those who understood what it meant to grieve. Summary. As soon as the news of her husband's sudden death reached her ears, Emma's world came crashing down. She couldn't believe that the man she had loved for 10 years was gone, leaving her to raise their 2 young children alone. The days that followed were a blur of tears, sorrow, and confusion. Emma felt lost, like she was wandering aimlessly in a never-ending storm. Her family and friends did their best to support her, but Emma couldn't shake off the feeling that nobody truly understood what she was going through. She attended grief support groups, but the conversations seemed shallow and formulaic. She wanted to talk about her husband, to share the memories that made him unique and special, but she felt like she had to fit her experience into a predetermined mold of what grief should look like. As the weeks turned into months, Emma became increasingly disillusioned with the way society viewed grief. She couldn't understand why people were so quick to offer condolences and then move on with their lives, as if her husband's death was a problem that needed to be solved. Emma knew that her grief wasn't something that could be fixed. It was a part of her, a testament to the love that she and her husband shared. One day, while scrolling through social media, Emma stumbled upon a group of people who felt the same way. They talked about grief as an experience to be tended to, rather than a problem to be solved. They shared stories about their loved ones, the good and the bad, the funny and the poignant. They didn't offer trite words of encouragement. Instead, they listened and validated each other's pain. For the first time since her husband's death, Emma felt like she had found a community that understood her. She could talk about her husband without fear of judgment or being told to move on. She could cry and laugh and share the memories that made her heart ache and sing. As she connected with others, Emma began to see that rethinking grief support was possible. It wasn't an easy road, but it was worth it. Together, they were building a new narrative, one that recognized grief as a natural part of life, not a problem to be solved. Emma realized that she was not alone in her pain and that there were people who would stand with her, cry with her, and carry on together. Now, the insights and knowledge I gained from reading It's Okay That You're Not Okay were phenomenal. I highly recommend it. Thank you for taking the time to watch, and if you found value in this video, be sure to hit that like button and subscribe to my channel for more great content. Trust me, you won't regret it.